The rain came down in thin, misty sheets against the windows of the Mercer apartment, blurring the city lights of Seattle like watercolor tears. Daniel stood in the narrow kitchen, fingers curled around a chipped mug, the coffee inside long gone cold. The silence in the apartment didn't used to bother him, but lately it felt like the walls were closing in, inch by inch. Lydia hadn't come home yet. She hadn't texted, hadn't called. Not unusual these days. He shifted his gaze to the peeling paint near the baseboard, the one spot he had meant to fix months ago. Back then, he still believed things could be fixed. Relationships, careers, dreams, naive optimism, he now thought. The door finally opened at nearly midnight. Lydia stepped inside, the click of her heels sharp against the hardwood floor. Her makeup was flawless, her hair in perfect waves, not a single sign of a long, exhausting workday. She looked untouched, untouched by their shared struggle, untouched by him. "Hey," Daniel said softly. She didn't answer right away, just shrugged off her coat and hung it up with mechanical precision. "We need to talk," she said. The phrase struck him like a cold wind. He had heard it in her tone before, distant, restrained, the tone of someone preparing to sever something. "What's wrong?" he asked. She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there wasn't anger. It was something worse. Resignation. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel." Only 5 words, but they carved through him. "I'm tired," she continued. "Tired of pretending everything's fine. Tired of living paycheck to paycheck. Tired of being married to this version of you." "This version?" His voice barely held steady. "You weren't like this when we met," she whispered. "You were driven. You had direction. But now, everything falls apart around you. Your startup, your confidence, your plans for the future. I can't tie my life to someone who keeps sinking." The words stung because she wasn't entirely wrong. After the startup collapsed 6 months earlier, he had spiraled. He tried to find work, but nothing came fast enough. Bills piled up, his sense of worth thinned, but hearing it from Lydia, the woman he once believed would weather any storm with him, made the wound infinitely deeper. "Lydia." He stepped toward her, but she stepped back. "I've met someone," she said. There it was, the real fracture. A name followed. Richard Vaughn, her firm's marketing director. Wealthy, influential. Everything Daniel currently wasn't. "It just happened," she said. "He understands the life I want, the stability I need. And I don't?" His voice cracked, raw and quiet. She looked away. He swallowed hard. "So that's it? After everything we've been through?" A long silence passed before she answered. "I'm leaving tonight." She packed in under 15 minutes. No tears, no hesitation, no lingering glances backward at the life they built. The apartment door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than any slammed door. Daniel sank onto the couch, hands trembling. The room around him felt cavernous, too empty, too quiet, too hollow. The lamp cast a long shadow behind him, stretching across the floor like a reminder of everything slipping away. On the coffee table lay a photo from 3 years ago, their honeymoon in Oregon. Lydia had looked at him then with admiration, pride, love. Now, he wondered if those feelings had ever been real or if they were just illusions built on the illusion of success. Hours passed. The rain continued. He didn't move. When his phone vibrated, he hoped stupidly it was her. It wasn't. It was a notification from his bank. Balance, $112.64. He exhaled a shaking breath, pressing his palms to his eyes. That night, Daniel Mercer understood something he'd refused to acknowledge. Lydia didn't leave because he was poor. She left because she was scared. Scared of losing status, scared of judgment, scared of standing beside a man who wasn't winning. And now he was alone. A man stripped down to his bones, left with nothing but silence and a half-empty apartment overlooking a city that kept moving forward without him. But someday, though he couldn't yet imagine it, this would not be the end of his story. It would be the beginning. The morning after Lydia left, Seattle felt unnaturally bright, as if the sky had decided to mock Daniel with a rare burst of sunlight. He stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the dented toaster and the stack of unpaid bills beside it. Everything looked the same as yesterday, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. The ring he once wore sat on the table, catching the sunlight with a faint, indifferent glimmer. He made coffee out of habit, not desire. The bitter scent filled the room, but it did nothing to warm him. He wondered if Lydia woke up beside Richard now, if she was sipping coffee in a kitchen that wasn't crumbling around the edges, if she was smiling, relieved, lighter without him. The thought hollowed him. At 10:14 a.m., someone knocked on his door. Not the hesitant knock of a friend, not a neighbor. No one visited him these days. It was firm, rhythmic, official. When he opened it, a courier held out a clipboard. Delivery for Daniel Mercer. Sign here. Daniel stared at the large white envelope as if it were radiating heat. He knew what it was even before he signed. Lydia didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She didn't consider giving him time. He closed the door behind him and leaned his forehead against it for a moment, letting the envelope rest heavy in his hands. When he finally sat at the table and opened it, paper slid out neatly, too neatly for something so cruel. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Legal language, clean formatting, no emotion. Lydia's name appeared over and over. Her signature already filled the pages. Elegant, flawless, unfaltering. He almost laughed at the efficiency of it. She had been preparing this, long before the night she walked out, long before she said she was tired, long before he realized their rough patch was actually the end. He read her stated reasons, irreconcilable differences. Funny. Money had a way of disguising itself with polite terms. He tried to process the sentences, but certain phrases stood out like cuts. Both parties have mutually agreed. A lie. No shared assets of significant value. Because they had nothing left. The petitioner requests no alimony. At least she didn't want his non-existent money. When he flipped to the last page, his breath caught. Lydia had handwritten a single line beside her signature. I hope you find someone who can give you the stability I couldn't. It wasn't kind. It wasn't an apology. It was a wound disguised as benevolence. Daniel put the papers down and stared at the wall, his vision blurring. He tried to remember the last time Lydia held him, touched him, even looked at him with softness. Maybe 6 months ago. Maybe longer. He reached blindly for a pen. Was he supposed to fight? Demand answers? Ask her to try counseling? Confront Richard? Everyone in movies fought for their marriage. Everyone in love stories begged for one more chance. But Daniel felt something inside him, something tender, exhausted, collapse slowly, like a building sinking into its foundation. He didn't have the strength to defend something only one of them believed was worth saving. He signed the first page, then the next, then the next. His hands trembled only once when he reached the line that read, marriage date, August 19th, their anniversary. A date that once made his chest warm. Now it felt like a tombstone. He signed anyway. When he set the pen down, the silence in the apartment grew deeper, stretching like an ocean around him. He placed the papers back into the envelope with more care than they deserved. Not because Lydia deserved gentleness, but because he needed to feel like something in his life remained intact. He sealed the envelope, pressing the flap down firmly. Final, unchanging, absolute. The walk to the mailbox was short, but it felt like miles. His legs were heavy, as if grief had settled into his muscles. People brushed past him on the sidewalk, wrapped in their lives, oblivious to the man carrying the death certificate of his marriage. He stood before the steel mailbox for a long moment. A streetcar rattled in the distance. Someone laughed across the street. A dog barked. Everything moved. Everything continued. Except him. The envelope in his hand felt like it contained every mistake he ever made. Every late-night coding session that stole his presence from Lydia. Every argument over bills. Every silent moment where he thought she understood, but she didn't. He let out a shaky breath, then let the envelope slip through the slot. The metallic echo that followed was soft, but to Daniel it sounded like a door slamming shut forever. He didn't cry. He didn't call anyone. He didn't go home and drink himself numb. He just stood there on the sidewalk, sunlight flickering off passing cars, feeling the quietest, most devastating break of his life unfold inside his chest. Later that night, he returned to the apartment and sat on the couch, the same spot where Lydia once fell asleep with her head on his shoulder after long workdays. But now the cushion beside him felt cold, uninhabited, final. He picked up the ring from the table and turned it in his hand. His reflection curved across its surface, distorted, small, tired. He placed it gently into a drawer and closed it. Daniel Mercer wasn't married anymore, and the world didn't change at all. But something in him did. Something shifted quietly, painfully toward a future he couldn't see, but would be forced to walk into alone. The months after the divorce moved strangely slow on some days, brutally fast on others. Daniel existed more than he lived, drifting through hours like a man who'd misplaced his purpose somewhere between heartbreak and rent payments. But even grief had its limits. One morning he woke before the alarm, sunlight barely threading through the blinds. He sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes, staring at the hardwood floor. The apartment was still, but inside him something finally shifted, a quiet decision forming, not out of hope, but out of necessity. He needed to rebuild. Not for Lydia, not to prove anything, but simply to keep from sinking. By noon that same day, he was sitting in a crowded cafe in Fremont, laptop open, scanning job listings like a man searching for oxygen. Most of the openings felt wrong. Mid-level corporate positions that promised stability but carried the stale scent of predictability. And then he saw it. Cipher Core AI seeking founding engineer. Pre-seed, unfunded, high risk, bold vision. Daniel read the listing twice. Most people would have scrolled past. Most people wanted guarantees. But Daniel was no longer someone who expected safety. The worst had already happened. The person he loved most had walked away. Compared to that, the risk of another failed startup felt almost comforting. He sent his portfolio. 20 minutes later, he received a reply. 24 hours after that, he sat across from Jonah Pierce, a sharp-eyed, fast-talking former academic with a restless mind and a messy desk. "So," Jonah said, leaning back in his chair, "you're fresh out of a shutdown." Daniel nodded steadily. "Good," Jonah replied. "Means you've bled. Means you know what it takes." Most interviewers saw failure as a stain. Jonah saw it as seasoning. They talked for 2 hours about machine learning ethics, about solving bias in large data sets, about whether consciousness in AI was a philosophical illusion or a future inevitability. It was the first conversation in months that didn't feel like cardboard. When Daniel left the office, Jonah shouted after him, "If you want the job, show up Monday. Don't dress fancy, we're broke." It was the closest thing to hope Daniel had felt in a long time. The first few weeks at CipherCore felt like stepping back into an unfinished dream. The office was barely an office, just a converted warehouse with mismatched chairs, cold air from the vents, and a coffee machine that died twice a week. But the whiteboards were full of ideas that mattered, the kind of ambitious blueprints only foolish or brilliant people dared chase. Daniel buried himself in code, sometimes working until sunrise. It wasn't escapism. It wasn't distraction. It was survival. Heartbreak became fuel. Silence became focus. Loss became clarity. Jonah noticed. One evening, when only the two of them remained in the warehouse, Jonah approached with 2 cans of cheap cola. "You don't talk much," he said, handing Daniel one. "Nothing to say," Daniel replied. "That so?" Jonah raised a brow. "Because your code says you're either running from something or toward something." Daniel didn't answer. Not because he was hiding, but because he didn't yet know which was true. "Well," Jonah said, cracking open his drink, "whatever it is, keep going. I've never seen someone build with that much quiet fire." Quiet fire. Daniel carried the phrase home with him. 6 months passed. CipherCore changed. A local VC firm visited, impressed by their prototype. Then a major tech journalist wrote about their audacious approach to real-time behavioral modeling. More interviews followed, more interest, more pressure. And through it all, Daniel's name kept resurfacing, the architect behind the system's core stability, the one who turned scattered notes into actual innovation. He still lived in the same apartment, but the space felt different now. The walls no longer pressed in. The silence was no longer suffocating. The memories of Lydia still lingered, her laughter echoing faintly in the corners, Her perfume hidden deep in the closet fibers, but the pain had shifted. It wasn't gone. It had simply been reorganized. One night after a 12-hour sprint, Daniel collapsed onto his couch. His laptop screen glowed with the latest test results, a near-perfect run. His chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not in spite of Lydia leaving, but independent of it. His phone buzzed on the table. A text from Jonah. "You free tomorrow? Investors want to meet our quiet genius? Wear a real shirt." Daniel chuckled softly. It felt odd, the sensation moving through his chest like a warm current. A real shirt. God. He hadn't worn one since the divorce hearing. He put the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed outside, a soft pulse of traffic and distant sirens. For the first time, he felt aligned with the rhythm of it, as if he wasn't just watching life happen around him, but was finally stepping back into it. He thought of Lydia then, but not with grief. More like someone remembering a road they once traveled, one that led exactly where it needed to. Even if it hurt, he whispered into the stillness, not as a prayer, but as a realization. "I'm not sinking anymore." And the universe answered him with the quiet hum of his laptop, steady, confident, alive. 2 months later, Cypher Core closed a Series A round worth tens of millions. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed. Jonah made a chaotic, triumphant speech. But in the photos published online the next day, Daniel stood slightly apart from the others. Calm, centered, composed. A man rebuilt not by revenge, but by relentless resilience. The world didn't yet know his story. Lydia didn't either. But soon, she would. Daniel returned home late on a Thursday evening, the sky washed in the gray-blue haze of early spring. Cypher Core's office had been alive all day. Investor meetings, architecture debates, last-minute model fixes, the kind of chaos that kept him grounded, even energized. But now, stepping into his quiet apartment, the air felt heavier, as if it were holding its breath for him. He didn't turn on the lights right away. He liked the half-dark. The shadows felt kinder than the glare of artificial brightness, easier on a mind that spent too many hours staring into glowing screens. On the floor near the door sat a small stack of mail the building manager had slipped under earlier electricity offers. A local grocery coupon book, a letter from the bank, and one envelope that didn't fit with the others. Ivory, thick, expensive, and addressed in handwriting he recognized instantly. Lydia. Something inside Daniel stilled. He picked it up with the same caution he might use for a fragile object, not because he feared breaking it, but because he feared what it might revive inside him. He carried the envelope to the kitchen table, the only place in the apartment that still felt neutral. The overhead light hummed softly as he sat, staring at the elegant cursive across the front. Daniel Mercer. His name, written by a woman who once spoke it like a promise, now sending it back to him like an obligation. He slipped a finger beneath the flap and opened it slowly. No rush. The world could wait. Inside was a card, thick and embossed in gold. He pulled it out and let the envelope fall gently onto the table. A wedding invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Lydia Collins and Richard Hale." The words blurred for a second, not because he felt heartbreak. That wound had healed, scarred, and hardened, but because of the strange surrealism of it. Lydia, who had once whispered vows to him under a candlelit canopy. Lydia, who had walked out of their shared life without a tremor of hesitation. Lydia, who assumed he was still living in the shadow of her absence. A soft laugh escaped him, not bitter, not mocking, just disbelief. She thought he was still the man she left behind, the man who struggled to afford date nights, who worried about rent, who stayed up until dawn debugging code while she slept facing the wall. She thought nothing had changed. Daniel leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath him. Memories moved through his mind in gentle, haunting waves. Lydia brushing her hair beside the bathroom mirror. Lydia complaining about grocery prices. Lydia sitting silently in the living room while he worked, her eyes glazing over when he tried explaining his dreams. He wondered if she had sent this out of guilt or pride, or maybe in her mind, inviting him meant proving she had moved on, that she had won. But the strangest part was the assumption buried beneath it, that Daniel was still small enough to be humbled by her. He set the invitation down and opened the smaller card tucked behind it, handwritten pressed neatly in Lydia's unmistakable script. Daniel, I hope this finds you well. I thought it would be meaningful for you to see that things can work out for both of us. I truly wish you the best in life. Lydia meaningful. For him. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost smiling at the unintentional cruelty wrapped in politeness. Lydia hadn't changed. She still saw life through the narrow lens of status and optics. Still believed her choices shaped his emotional weather. Still assumed he remained orbiting somewhere around her gravity. But Daniel's world had shifted. Axis, direction, velocity, everything. And she didn't know. She didn't know about Cipher Corps' meteoric rise. She didn't know he was now part owner of a company worth more than some of Richard's quarterly budgets. She didn't know reporters requested interviews with him. She didn't know the tech boardrooms in San Francisco and Boston whispered his name with curiosity and respect. She didn't know Daniel Mercer had rebuilt himself into someone entirely new, not from revenge, but from resilience carved out of the quiet hours she abandoned. He held the invitation again, running his thumb over the gold letters. He didn't feel that old ache. He didn't feel longing. What he felt was clarity, a calm, steady truth that settled deep in his chest. He had outgrown the life Lydia left him for. The man she abandoned wasn't the man opening this envelope. He placed the card aside and stood, walking to the window. Seattle's cityscape glowed in the night, buildings shimmering against the reflective surface of the sound. A train rumbled somewhere in the distance, steady and sure. Daniel watched the lights for a long moment. He wasn't sure yet if he would attend, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he showed up, Lydia would not recognize the man walking through those doors, because heartbreak had forged him, ambition had rebuilt him, silence had sharpened him, and now life was offering him something strangely poetic, a moment where past and present could stand face to face. He closed the curtains, his expression calm, composed, unreadable. Whatever came next, he was ready. Daniel stood in front of the mirror on the evening of the wedding, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. It wasn't the cheap, off-the-rack kind he used to buy when he and Lydia were just trying to survive on his salary. No, this was custom-made, sharp, clean, and undeniably expensive. A silent testament to the life he had built after she left. Yet when he looked at his own reflection, he didn't see success first. He saw history. He saw the man Lydia had once dismissed, the one who came home exhausted and still cooked dinner. The one who apologized first even when he wasn't wrong. The one who kept forgiving her distance because he thought love could fix everything. That man was gone, but the wound had memory. He left the mirror and grabbed his car keys. The night air hit him the moment he stepped outside, cool and steady, grounding him. As he drove toward the venue, an extravagant lakeside resort that Lydia clearly wanted to flaunt, Daniel felt an odd mixture swirling in his chest. Not hatred, not longing, just unfinished business. When he pulled up to the entrance, the valet glanced at his car, sleek, electric, top tier, and whistled softly. "Beautiful ride, sir." Daniel nodded, offering a polite smile. "Thank you." He walked through the lobby, following the soft hum of music spilling from the ballroom. Every step felt heavy with memory. He could almost hear Lydia's laughter from years ago, see her curled up on their old couch, feel her fingers brushing his cheek while promising she believed in him. But then he blinked, and the present washed it away. The wedding was lavish, gold-trimmed decor, shimmering lights, expensive floral arrangements. Lydia always said she wanted a fairy tale wedding. She just never said she wanted it with someone else. Guests whispered as Daniel entered. Not out of malice, but because he looked like someone important, someone confident, someone different from the version Lydia had abandoned. He found an empty seat near the back and sat quietly. His heart thudded a little harder than usual, but he kept his expression steady. Then the ceremony music shifted, the doors opened, and Lydia appeared. She was beautiful undeniably. Her dress flowed like a soft shimmer of pearl and glass. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the kind meant for photos, not for truth. Her arm was looped around Richard's, the wealthy executive she had chosen over Daniel. But when her eyes drifted across the room and found him, her smile cracked. Just a little. Just enough. Daniel felt his breath hold for a moment, not because he wanted her back, but because something inside him understood, suddenly and sharply, that he no longer belonged to the version of himself she once knew. He straightened slightly, calm, composed. He was here. He was whole. And she had no idea who he had become. The ceremony washed over him, vows, applause, forced laughter. Daniel watched it all with a quiet distance, like viewing a life he had escaped rather than lost. During the reception, people approached him with curiosity. "Which company are you with? I've seen you in tech articles, haven't I? You worked with Richard once, right?" Daniel answered politely, but he kept his emotions guarded. He was not here to impress anyone. He was here for one thing only: closure, a gentle acceptance of what was, so he could finally release what remained. Across the room, Lydia kept glancing at him, subtle, quick, questioning. Confusion flickered in her eyes, as though she couldn't reconcile the man standing before her with the man she left behind. For the first time, Daniel felt something surprising. He didn't need her to understand. He didn't need her to regret. He didn't need anything from her at all. He was simply done. And that truth, quiet, steady, and powerful, felt better than any revenge ever could. Lydia had imagined this day down to every detail: the flowers, the grand hall, the applause, the way people would admire her for moving on with a successful man. Everything was curated, controlled, perfect, until Daniel walked in. He didn't storm in dramatically, didn't seek attention, didn't look like a man carrying heartbreak. He walked with steady confidence, the kind that can't be faked, the kind she had never seen in him before, or perhaps never bothered to see. Lydia's breath caught mid-smile. Her hand, resting on Richard's arm, faltered slightly. Daniel, but not the Daniel she abandoned. Not the man who once waited up for her with dinner, who believed in her lies about overtime meetings, who kept forgiving her coldness. No, the man standing at the back of the hall was a stranger wrapped in calm power. His suit fit him like he belonged in it. His posture was sharp, self-assured. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not mourning, not longing, just distant, emotionally out of reach. For a moment, the noise of the venue dimmed. Lydia blinked, expecting the image to change, but it didn't. He really looked like that. A quiet fear crawled up her spine. During the vows, Lydia's voice wavered once, not enough for the guests to notice, but enough for Richard to glance at her. She forced a smile, pretending it was just nerves. But inside, her thoughts were spiraling. How? When? Why does he look like someone who didn't fall apart after losing me? She stole another glance at Daniel. He wasn't even looking at her. He was calmly observing the ceremony, composed, as if he had already closed that chapter. She felt something she had not expected. Not regret for leaving him, but regret that he no longer cared. The ceremony ended. Applause swelled. Lydia and Richard walked down the aisle, hands lifted in celebration. But Lydia's eyes kept drifting back toward Daniel, as if she needed confirmation he was real. At the reception, her anxiety worsened. People whispered, "That guy at table 9, isn't he the AI architect from NovaCore? I read an article about him. They said he helped design that predictive quantum model. Is he an investor? A partner?" Each word hit Lydia like a new fracture in her carefully built world. Daniel? That Daniel? Back then, she had left him because he was going nowhere. No ambition, no money, no future. Or so she told herself to justify leaving. Yet the room seemed to notice him more than her husband. And worst of all, Daniel didn't once try to speak to her, didn't look her way, didn't show a single sign of pain, as if she had become irrelevant. When Richard excused himself to talk to guests, Lydia finally worked up the nerve to approach from a distance. She didn't dare walk all the way to him, not yet. She lingered behind a column, watching him speak to two CEOs who clearly knew who he was. He laughed. He looked relaxed. His aura was different, controlled, magnetic, unshakable. The final crack split through her chest. She had expected him to come crawling back someday, or at least to remain the version she left small, insecure, easy to step over. But no, he had risen somewhere she couldn't follow. He had built himself into someone she could never claim credit for or control. For the first time since choosing Richard, Lydia felt something sharp and unfamiliar. She had traded the wrong future. Her fairy tale suddenly felt fragile, like glass under too much weight. In Daniel's presence, calm, unbothered, untouchable, was the hammer. The reception lights dimmed into a warm gold, and the hum of conversation filled the hall. Somewhere between the clinking glasses and polite laughter, Lydia's facade finally began to fracture. It started quietly, a whispered comment from her bridesmaid Erin. "Lydia, why do you keep looking at him?" Lydia forced a smile, but her throat tightened. "I'm not." "You are," Erin said softly. "Since the moment he walked in." Lydia looked down at her wedding ring, a ring she had once believed symbolized a fresh start. Tonight it suddenly felt heavier. Later she slipped toward the courtyard, needing air. The night breeze cooled the heat on her cheeks. She expected to be alone, but she wasn't. Erin and two other friends stood near the fountain, speaking in low voices. "She never healed," one of them whispered. "You can hear it in the way she said his name. His name. Daniel." Lydia froze, her breath catching. The group turned, surprised to see her. "Lydia," Erin said gently, "maybe you need to sit down." But Lydia didn't sit. She was too tired of holding everything upright. "Say it," she whispered. "Whatever you were saying, just say it." Erin exchanged a glance with the others, then stepped forward. "You never got over what happened with Daniel?" "Not really." Lydia's chest rose sharply, a defensive inhale, then another. She shook her head. "I left him. I moved on. I'm getting married." "You left him physically," Erin said. "But emotionally? You dragged the wound into this marriage." Silence settled like a cold fog. Lydia pressed her fingers to her temple. The truth vibrated underneath her skin, painful and undeniable. And then she said it quietly at first. "You don't understand. I expected him to fail." The words hung heavy in the air. Erin blinked. "What?" Lydia swallowed hard, voice trembling. "I expected him to fail forever. That's the part no one knows." Her breath turned shallow. "I told myself leaving him was the right choice because he'd always be stuck, because he'd never become anything more." Her voice cracked. I thought his failure would justify what I did." The confession felt like yanking out a thorn buried deep inside her chest, sharp, bleeding, but real. "And now," Lydia whispered, "he's everything I said he'd never be." Her hands shook. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. "He wasn't supposed to grow without me. He wasn't supposed to become someone stronger. I left to escape a dead-end life, and now I'm the one standing still." Her friends stood quietly, absorbing the jagged edges of her truth. For the first time, Lydia understood what had been haunting her all night. It wasn't Daniel's success that shocked her. It was the realization that she had misjudged him and herself completely. She had walked away believing she'd traded up, but in trading him for comfort, she had traded away the version of herself who once wanted love more than lifestyle. "Lydia," Erin spoke softly, "does Richard know any of this?" Lydia closed her eyes. "No, because I never wanted to admit it. Not to him, not to anyone." And then she said the words she had dreaded the most. "Seeing Daniel again made me realize I never healed. I just ran." A long, hollow silence followed. And in that silence, Lydia understood something brutal. Daniel's presence wasn't her undoing. Her own choices were. And tonight, finally, all the truths she had buried clawed their way to the surface. Daniel didn't stay long after the cake was cut. He offered polite nods, a few firm handshakes, and a quiet goodbye to the groom, nothing more, nothing less. Calm, respectful, unbothered. To the room, his departure seemed ordinary. To Lydia, it felt like the floor falling out from under her feet. From across the hall, she watched him walk toward the exit. His steps were steady, his shoulders relaxed, no tension, no lingering pain, no desire to look back. The man she abandoned had once broken in silence. This man was whole, unreachable. She needed a final glance, a flicker of recognition, some proof she still existed somewhere inside him. But Daniel never turned around. He simply opened the door and stepped into the cool night air, disappearing into the soft halo of the valley lights. And in that moment, Lydia felt something collapse inside her chest. The quiet, irreversible kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream, it sinks. Outside, Daniel breathed in the night. No triumph, no gloating, just a clean, deep breath, the kind a person only takes after finally letting go of years of weight. He hadn't come to ruin her wedding. He hadn't come to flaunt his transformation. He came to prove something to himself, that he could stand in front of the woman who once broke him and feel nothing but peace. And that was his revenge, the gentle, devastating kind. Because Lydia always believed she was the center of his world. She expected to haunt him for years, to live rent-free in the ruins of the man she left behind. Instead, she became irrelevant. Walking away wasn't an act of victory, it was an act of closure. He whispered to himself as the driver opened the car door. "It's done," and he meant it. Inside the hall, the party raged on. Laughter, music, champagne, a perfect celebration from the outside. But Lydia barely heard any of it. Her new husband smiled at guests. Photographers circled, speeches flowed. Yet she stood still, staring at the doorway Daniel had disappeared through, her pulse racing with a cold, sharp truth. She had lost more than a man. She had lost the version of herself who still believed she deserved the better choice. Richard noticed her distraction. "Everything okay?" Lydia forced a brittle smile. "Just tired." But fatigue wasn't the weight crushing her chest. It was regret, deep, suffocating, irrevocable. Because now she saw the full scope of her mistake. She left the man who would eventually become something extraordinary, for the man who simply looked extraordinary in the moment. And knowing the truth, knowing she could never undo it, was the punishment she would carry into her new marriage. A lifelong sentence signed on her wedding night. Daniel's car pulled away from the venue. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. His silence had said everything. He won the only way that mattered, by healing, by growing, by becoming a man whose peace was louder than any revenge. And Lydia? She would spend the rest of her life remembering the moment he walked away from her a second time, this time by choice. And that was the quietest but cruelest revenge of all.